Hey everyone, it's Jazzy Marie and welcome back to another video of the Neurcle Nexus. In the last video, I covered introductory points such as who we are and what we'll be talking about, but I did also mention plurality, and today we will get into what exactly that phenomenon is. So for those who aren't familiar with plurality or systems, plurality is basically the phenomenon of sharing one's brain with other self-aware, sapient, and sentient mental constructs, whether that be parts of a person or multiple people. It depends on the system. There are many different types of plurality, but the two that we'll mainly focus on for this video are traumagenic and endogenic. And while the latter is controversial within the plural community, unfortunately, this video will explain the two types and how they work. Myself, all types of plurality are valid in my view, especially because we're not a traumagenic system. We're not a traumagenic plural collective because of the fact that our trauma is not connected to how we have formed as a collective. So first things first, traumagenic plurality is a plurality that was created by traumatic experiences. Usually this is childhood trauma. It could be repeated or a singular, very stressful event. But usually the most talked about or generally the most well-known types of traumagenic plurality is dissociative plurality, which happens to also be disordered plurality. DID, PDID, OSDD, UDD, and other variants of dissociative disorders are the most well-known type of plurality in general, which is good that people are aware of these disorders because of the fact that those who have them do need specific types of aid and need with managing things like dissociative amnesia. However, not all traumagenic plurality is dissociative, and not all traumagenic plurality is disordered either. A lot of people tend to think that traumagenic or endogenic are synonyms or antonyms for other plural labels like non-dissociative or non-disordered. And we will get to all of that later on in the video. Endogenic plurality is plurality that was not created by traumatic experiences and instead due to things like neurodivergence or spiritual background, even willingly, which is also controversial because so many things are controversial in the world today. But people do willingly create self-aware, sapient, sentient mental constructs that share their brain with them, and usually it's lifelong. Now, the reason why endogenic plurality is seen as controversial in plural spaces is because of a very traumagenic focused view of plurality. A lot of people unfortunately accuse endogenic plurals of faking their experiences or claiming to have a dissociative disorder and therefore taking away resources from those that have it. It's a mess. But it's important to understand that someone who is plural but without a dissociative disorder and without a traumatic origin is not necessarily misusing a label. I would also like to point out that people do fake disorders and people do fake phenomena. That does not mean that those who actually have the disorder or who experience the phenomena are the same as those who are faking, because that's stupid to assume. And witch hunting does not make things any better. Someone who is suspected or accused of faking, they can't really be gone after in the way that many of the white knights of the plural community would like to assume that they can be. Because it's very hard to tell if someone is faking their experiences from a one-off video or something. A lot of people express themselves in social media in ways that could be very, I guess people call them eccentric, or I don't know, cringe. I'm pretty sure people still use that word. but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're faking. And yeah, unfortunately, there are people who will openly admit that they were faking for attention, but that does not mean that all people who have expressed that they experienced something should be thought of as faking. Now, in the case of traumagenic plurals, their experiences with bigotry from singlets, aka people who are alone in their heads and don't experience plurality. Bigotry against traumagenic plurals from singlets has fueled a lot of the hate towards endogenic plurals from traumagenic plurals because of the fact that they see endogenic plurals experiences not being tied to trauma or suffering, and it creates a sort of defense when someone is experiencing something that is like inherently tied to the pain and the suffering that they've experienced through life. To see someone else with a similar experience but not tied to that suffering can make them feel very invalidated, which is fair because, I mean, I would be pretty mad too if I had X, but X is pain for me, and I saw someone else with X and they seem to be not in pain. However, it's not the fault of endogenic plurals that singlets treat both types of plurality and other types so poorly. It's unfortunately like a cycle of abuse, a hand-me-down of awful experiences. Singlets treat traumagenic plurals badly, and traumagenic plurals treat endogenic plurals badly, and both singlets and traumagenic plurals treat endogenic plurals badly, actually, when the plural community should be sticking together to fight back against that type of bigotry anyway. And that's why infighting sucks a lot in communities like the trans community and other LGBTQ plus communities in general. They have a lot of infighting, and it's sort of sad to see when most of the hatred they get is coming from inside the community and it's distracting from what's outside. Now, I will say that there are mixed origin systems as well, those whose plurality comes from both traumatic and non-traumatic origin. So I think I've pretty much covered the two main types of plurality, and we will definitely get into other types and origins of systems and collectives and how they function. Now I would like to talk about what exactly we are, like what type of system the Neurcle Nexus is. Our system formed from neurodivergence, autism to be exact. This brain was diagnosed with it at a pretty young age, back when doctors still called it Asperger's. But the two main factors from autism that has formed our collective are hyperfixations and this brain's understanding of interactions. Now, about the first one, hyperfixations can be loosely described as things that consume one's mental resources so intensely that it's all they can think about or it's all they can do. They're not voluntary, and usually they're actually really annoying, especially if the hyperfixation is on a subject that many people are hostile toward. And when it comes to neurodivergent individuals, they may experience, and they do experience, hyperfixations way more often than those who don't have those conditions. Now, when I personally was younger as the host, when I was younger, I recently, did I say recently? Regularly, I meant regularly. Jeez. I regularly had hyperfixations on things, usually people, characters, and they would basically be all I could think about from the time I wake up to the time I go to sleep. And it was annoying for me mostly because when I wanted to think about other stuff, I just couldn't. And Usually whenever I hyperfixated on a character, a while later I would literally just meet them. Like, meet them, pretty much. They would just be there and we would just talk. and then they would be gone. This existed in a cycle up until 2018. Now, I know what you're thinking. I probably don't know, but I'm pretty sure I can have a good guess at what some random person or some random system in the audience may be thinking. Like, well, isn't that just what imaginary friends are, or something of the sort? I mean, I wish, but imaginary friends are usually, how do I put this? They're mental puppets. One can control what they do with their imaginary friends, their every actions, their feelings, their thoughts, their experiences, things like that. When it comes to headmates, they have their own agency and they have their own autonomy, so it's not really a matter of control. I really don't like that word when it comes to systems. Like, people will ask, so who's controlling who, or who usually controls the body the most, or stuff having to do with control, or quote unquote, big heavy air quotes, taking over. Yeah, a lot of people use lingo like that, and it was very uncomfortable because of the fact that we more so see ourselves as collaborating or cooperating rather than controlling, because we're just people, and that's all I can understand it as. Which brings us to the next part of how autism fueled well, I shouldn't say fuel, but basically just form the framework for how we exist. The fact that I personally cannot understand interaction in the same way that someone who didn't have autism would. For example, usually when somebody sees a person in a book versus a person in their own world, they have like internal ontological separation between that book person and that this world person. As for me, that distinction was not there. It wasn't there at all. I could recognize that the person in the book was not in the same world as someone from this world, but as for who was real or who existed more or who was more relevant, those differences did not register in this brain, and so they did not register for me, which created a blueprint for this brain to basically connect my presence with the presence of people who I saw or read about in fiction. Because I treat people in fiction the same way I treat people in nonfiction. There is no fundamental difference, I should say. There's a difference in location. Obviously, Harry Potter isn't in the same world as, I don't know, Hillary Clinton or something. I definitely recognize that people are separate location-wise. Cosmically, they're separate. I'm pretty sure we all have that established. But as for who's real is not really the type of question or matter that I focus on, because it just doesn't apply. What's there for people who may not have autism is not there for me. And honestly, it was pretty awkward for me when I first found out, and I didn't find out that this was the reason until much later. Now, what's really sad is that I didn't realize that this was the same process that I experienced when meeting people in this world. I'm a people watcher. I people watch all the time, all day. I see people and I look at their actions and I look at their speech and I wonder what they're doing, and I observe them. When I people watch, I basically look for the person who would best match my own personality traits and my beliefs and principles, yada yada, and that would determine whether I walk up to them and say hi or not. I did the same thing to people in this world that people in this world do to fictional people. We observe them, we read about them, we watch them, we analyze their thoughts, actions, and motives, and then usually that ends up creating like a sort of favorability for some characters over others. That's why we have comfort characters. Hooray, because they help with a lot of things. But the same process that we use for fiction, I used involuntarily for nonfiction. And so once again, that's a variant of the whole I don't really recognize interaction to be different type thing. So now with that out of the way, I'm not really going to go into the details of how we first formed. That will definitely be a separate video because trust me, it's a lot and I really don't want this video to be 45 minutes. So I'm going to leave it here for now. We've covered the basics of types of plurality. We covered what type of system we are. And I think that should be enough for this video for now. In the next video, I'll probably start with the details of who was where at what time. Thanks for listening, watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your time.